With great data comes even greater access latency. Welcome to the Presto Community Broadcast, where we transform your latency woes into fast insights. I'm your co-host, Brian Olson.
And I'm that other co-host, Manfred Moser.
Presto Community Broadcast is a show where we cover your events and happenings within the open source Presto community and show off a little bit of cool stuff about Presto. So this week we have David Stryker with us from Starburst, our home company. So thank you very much for joining us, David.
Great to be here.
So we're going to be talking to him a little bit later, covering first, Manfred's going to cover a little bit of concepts with ACID and some of the support that we have around that with the Hive connector. And then David's going to go into a little more details in one of the more recent pull requests that he added to basically allow for inserts and deletes. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the other work that's going in around there as well. So first we're gonna, go over the release 345 that came out since last episode. We're gonna cover a little bit about some trainings coming up, a couple highlights that came out from the newsletter, events that are coming up our way, and then at that point we'll hit the concept of the week with Manfred talking about ACID, hit the PR of the week with David, and then I will be covering question of the week, which we'll be talking about one that we missed the last 2 weeks because of my silly OBS goof. I feel like I have at least one goof per week, and that's all I'm allowed. So
that's right. It's always good to be a bit goofy, right?
Yeah, that's the point. Is to not take it too seriously. So yeah, I'm going to recover the question of the week that got cut off the last time, which is going to be talking about kind of like why we have Java 11, why we made that move, and kind of what to do if you're stuck in a Java 8 world in your company or wherever you are setting up for whatever reason, and kind of some workarounds and thoughts about that. So, and then we're going to wrap it up. So before we hop into any of that, let's run to a quick word from our sponsors, which happens to be Starburst. I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Starburst, for hosting this show. Starburst is an enterprise offering that builds upon open source Presto distribution. The main vectors you improve upon when moving to Starburst are performance, support, and simplicity to deploy. The performance gains come from an enterprise suite of Presto connectors that improve upon the open source connectors by offering parallel implementations and improved statistics exposed to the cost-based optimizer. There are also connectors that don't exist in the open source projects, such as the Snowflake connector and Delta Lake connector, and many other that prove useful in many enterprise applications. My favorite thing that Starburst offers is how they take away the pain of deployment, security, and scaling your Presto cluster up by offering Kubernetes deployments on multiple cloud platforms. This relieves a lot of pressure from your ops team and offers them a slick user interface called Mission Control that makes the management of your cross-platform clusters easy. Finally, they have a team of experts that are available to address any issues you experience. This team includes the original founders of Presto, a dedicated customer success team, and even Manfred and myself. We clearly think the product is great, but don't take our word for it. Try Presto for free. Head on over to starburstdata.com to learn more. And now back to the show. All right. Manfred, do you want to go over the release notes for 345?
Yeah, sure. 345 was an exciting release. It felt like it's a small one because it kind of followed up pretty quickly after 344, but it has some really significant things in it that you'd be amazed to find. One of them came from David, who added insert and delete for ACID tables, and we'll talk about that in a whole lot more detail later. The other one that's really amazing is the whole slew of performance improvements that you see in the general list up there. There's a whole bunch for different data types and stuff yet again. So we see the whole effort around dynamic filtering, push down, bucket pruning, and that kind of stuff. There's always more stuff, and here's also some changes related to just treating simple things like just making low-level performance improvements, but just for specific data types, for example, the decimal type. So there's a lot of things happening. In the security changes, we added column security, column mask, and row filter support for our file-based access control, which is pretty handy to have to test this kind of stuff out. Obviously, if you want to go into more full-blown usage, you would want to use something like Ranger, but this gives you a good idea of how to test it out and play around with it. So definitely a cool feature. And then something that snuck in and like looks kind of a small entry line in the Hive connector, but it's actually a big deal, is LinkedIn was working very hard on adding support for complex Hive views. So actual Hive views, not just like, Hive tables exposed, but actually the Hive QL kind of usage. And that was implemented by integrating a system called Coral. That's an open source sort of abstraction layer / translation layer from HiveQL to SQL. And LinkedIn was, a couple of engineers from LinkedIn were working very hard with our team on the Presto SQL side to get that integrated. And this is the first release this shipped. Obviously, it's not finished. There's always more stuff to be done, and you can expect things to come up around that in the 346 release as well again. But this is a pretty significant step, considering that from the start, Presto was designed to not support these kind of Hive things. And now via a very clean translation layer, we actually can say we do support Hive views. And for a lot of customers and users that have a significant Hive deployment, that's a big step, right? Like they have just a lot of legacy Hive views, and this feature now can potentially unlock that and make the case for migrating to Presto even stronger, because now you don't have to worry about this massive migration effort, and you can slowly, like you can adopt Presto, get the benefits of reading from the Hive data much faster, and still use that legacy that is exposed via all those developed Hive views. So it's a massive step, and I think it's going to have some really good impact. And LinkedIn is obviously contributing heavily on it, and obviously they're using it, right? So
Yeah,
can't be that bad.
for sure. I'm wondering, so did we have any support for Hive views before this? Do we know, or either you or David?
not native views. Like, I mean, if something is exposed as a table,
Yeah.
like in Hive, then it shows up just as a normal table, but an actual dynamic HiveQL view was not working.
Okay, because this says, I mean, the way it's described in the release notes is saying improved translation. So I was wondering if we ever had it, because I've heard a couple people complaining about that before.
It was very rudimentary. So
okay, got it.
This pulled in this Coral framework, which is very powerful and good. So
Here.
it's a whole bit different ball game.
Very cool. Well, I want to learn more about that, so maybe that'll be the next PR of the week.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of kind of connector changes, as you can see. Again, a bunch of performance improvements and stuff all over the place. So it's pretty good.
Yeah, definitely. We have like at least one for like almost every connector each time. It sneaks on through.
You're underestimating the number of connectors you have.
That's true.
You go to our connectors page, there's a whole lot more.
They're huge, yeah. Like I felt like for the longest time we were constantly seeing iceberg changes, and then now we're tapering off and seeing like some of the older ones
that's
come
because
back up.
That's because David finished and made the iceberg connector so awesome and ended up documenting it that now he can concentrate on the insert and delete and Hive ACID stuff, right,
Nice.
David?
Oh, shucks.
All right. Well, Manfred, I feel like you're going to be on the majority of the beginning of this podcast. So why don't you go over
this out quickly?
Why don't we talk about your Presto First Steps class that's going to be coming up? I'm actually in the way of the date, but let me scroll up here.
That's okay. It's in the 16th. I'm all shivering about it because I'm still working on a slide deck for it. So this is a follow-up training course to the Presto the Definitive Guide that I wrote with Martin and Matt for O'Reilly. This is now a follow-up training course, which basically allows you in an interactive session, 3-hour training class, to basically get your hands down and dirty with Presto in a very easy example way. I'll just cover what is Presto, how to get it started easily, how to bit of an introduction to what catalogs are and that kind of stuff, how to configure those things, how to get Presto up and running, how to connect with the CLI, and play around with the SQL a bit, basically. So very easy little training course with some Katacoda examples, so using an online learning platform. And it comes on the heels of the book, just about to reach around the corner of 5,000 downloads. So
nice.
The book is still available from starburstdata.com for free. And this builds on top of that.
Awesome.
That's pretty much it. So should be good.
Yeah. So, and one thing to mention, like this is definitely a beginner course, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you said simple, but depending on the level you're at, it could be a little more difficult for those coming in. So this is like if you've never done much with like data warehousing, or especially you've never done anything with Presto, this is a good course to get your feet wet.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't want to like read a book and like play around for hours on your own, but you want to have some sort of guidance and easy click the button demos and have some quick successes, that's the way to go.
Cool. So yeah, once again, that's November 16th, and this is in 2020, depending on when you're listening to this. And that's going to be 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So that's going to be pretty cool. Looking forward to that, Manfred.
And a quick tip, if you get a trial license for the like online learning from O'Reilly, you can attend that sort of as part of the trial.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So it's like, it kind of, so I know at one point somebody said it was for free, but then so it's kind of free, but it's like if you're doing a trial, but or if you're already paying for O'Reilly, then, you just get that lumped into the what you're paying for there.
That's right.
Cool. All right. So two things from the newsletter that came out. One is a blog that I wrote very shortly after the last show. I wrote it way before the show, but finally got published right after the show. This is just another kind of like if you are totally new to Presto, or you've like kind of dabbled with Presto and haven't used the Hive connector before. I wrote a blog basically talking about Hive connector. A lot of newer people to Presto that are jumping in and trying to figure out what's what, typically get really confused when they see the Hive connector. A lot of times you're coming in from, and this is a topic question that we answered a couple shows ago, basically just quickly answering this, but this is a more full blog version of the answer to this question. It basically says like, people are typically trying to get away from some sort of old Hive infrastructure, outdated Hive infrastructure, and they want to kind of replace that old clanky Hive runtime with Presto runtime. And then they get into Presto and they're like, well, why the heck is there a Hive connector? Is this just going to sit on top of Hive? And so basically that's not the case. And this goes into why we call it the Hive connector, what it's actually doing, and gives a little bit of a nice explanation as to some historic references to why we call it Hive connector instead of calling it cloud connector. You can connect this to different cloud storages. You can connect this to all sorts of different things, including letting it sit on top of HDFS. But really, I won't spoil the surprise, but it's basically just built on a Hive's data organization method. And so anyways, read through the blog if you're wanting to learn more about that. It's up on the prestosql.io blog, and we will be adding that in the show notes. And also there is speaking of Katacoda, is the stuff that was also going to be shown in Manfred's course. This one also has a little Katacoda demo just to get people a little integrated with what Presto looks like. And it's just like a very basic, like run one query, show the metadata and all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty straightforward. But a lot of fun, of course. And then the other one I was going to show is an O'Reilly blog, actually kind of going around some of the another kind of intro. So we're all this content that we're talking about today is all intro content. We will be linking this in the show notes. So if you are like brand new to Presto, we have like a whole bunch of new blogs and different resources for you to check out. So this basically just talks about like really motivates the whole purpose for like why are we using Presto SQL and or why are we using Presto at all. And so anyways, so this will go into a bit of a detail in terms of like what Presto offers to you and kind of the why to Presto if you're just like not understanding it at all. So definitely check that out. That will be listed in the show notes, and also kind of references you to the other materials like the book and other pieces. And then have a couple events. November 12th, we have Tom Natz. He's talking about getting rid of a lot of the high cost data warehouse costs in the cloud. And so that's going to be a webinar at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern time on November 12th. And then after that, we have the Databricks session which now that I'm looking at it, I'm not sure exactly the time, but it's the Data plus AI Summit in Europe that Databricks hosts, and I don't remember the exact dates of those, but we will have the link down in the show notes, and you can register for that. Camille, oh God, I don't remember how to say his name. Camille Bada Pawlikowski. Is that even? I probably just totally botched that. But he works at Starburst. He is one of the CTOs here at Starburst. He will be talking about Presto as well, talking about the some of the more interesting connectors that have been added to Presto in more recent years. So definitely check that out, especially if you're already going to Data AI Summit in Europe. Then we're still going through the Tech Talk Summits. Next one coming up is going to be in Detroit, so definitely check that out. These ones are all free to register for. You just gotta hop on, register, and then check out the talks that are being given there. One of them being from one of our solutions architects. And then finally, this one is a Presto conference in Tokyo. Unfortunately, this will be mostly in Japanese, so this is limited to people who can speak Japanese. There are going to be 2 talks that are in English. One is Martin Traverso, one of the co-creators, and the other one is my talk. So those are going to be two 10-minute talks in the very beginning, and then the rest are all going to be in Japanese. So I was asking if there was going to be any kind of networking afterwards or any kind of reason for English speakers to go, and the organizers mostly said no, it's going to be pretty fruitless unless you speak Japanese. So unfortunately, that will be kind of exclusive to those of you who do speak Japanese, but it is definitely a cool conference. Last 2019, all 3 of the co-creators, Martin, Dane, and David, went out there and spoke there, as well as there were a little more mix of Japanese and English talks. So there's a lot more resources there, but due to kind of COVID constraints and just like limitations on how they can organize this, it's mostly going to be in Japanese this year. So maybe next year, but definitely something to check out if you can speak Japanese.
Also, keep in mind, the cool thing is that there is a significant Presto user community in Japan, including some contributors.
For sure.
So who are running the event. So it's cool, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. There's Yuya. Yuya is a big contributor. He's from Line. There's a couple names that are escaping me, but they are. And where they a couple that work in AWS. I know there's like a 1 or 2, and then Arm Treasure. That's the other company that's really big out in Japan. Arm Treasure Data. So definitely going to be fun. I'm looking forward to speaking there at whatever time in the morning that's going to be for me. So anyways, but yeah, definitely looking forward to it. One last thing I wanted to announce. Don't have really anything to show for it, but will be all the same to anybody on the podcast. So there were some trainings a while back that we finished up with Dane, David, and Martine where they were 2-hour videos and 4 videos. So basically 8 hours of videos that you can watch through that bring you through topics such as like advanced SQL, which was David's talk, understanding and tuning Presto Query, which was kind of Martine's talk about the cost-based optimizer and different ways that you can understand it, securing Presto, which was Dane's first talk, and the fourth one was configuring and tuning performance, which was also Dane. These are all super valuable talks, but one problem with them was there was a lot of information and 2 hours worth of it, and so it's kind of hard to find what you wanted to. So we took some extra effort. There was a lot of demand on kind of time indexing these, so we finally got those time indexes out. The links to those are also going to be in the show notes. Check those out. Those have time indexes on specific topics that you may be interested in, so that way it's kind of like chapters in a book. You can just go right to whatever you're truly interested in. Still, the Presto Summit series is available on the blogs as well, so check those out, and we'll also be linking you to a recent set of podcasts that came out if you haven't checked those out yet. So with all of that, I think that's pretty much the news. Manfred, are you ready to talk about ACID today?
Depends on what kind of acid we're talking about.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like in the States we need a little bit of acid.
A pretty technical one. Okay, so yes, I am ready. So let's roll into that.
Cool.
So this is in relation to what we're going to talk about later, and that's the insert and delete update for ACID tables. So we want to sort of frame this up a bit to understand what we even talk about. So ACID stands for atomicity, consistency, isolation, and durability in a database and interactions with a database. It's a very long-standing, well-known concept. Back in the day when we had only relational databases, it was like a decent database just has ACID. Like if it doesn't have ACID, it's a no-go, and it's like just some, some like a toy database, right? Like MySQL or something like that. That was the notion back then, right? So, so very important that you basically, with atomicity, it means that a transaction in a database, like some sort of change, adding a record or whatever, or a bunch of records, either fully fails or fully succeeds. Ideally, obviously, fully succeeds, right? There's no sort of inconsistent state, which is related to the consistency itself. A database is always consistent. So whatever rules you define, be it with like relationships between records and so on, it is consistent. So for example, you need to delete a customer from a database. Then if you delete that customer, their address also gets deleted because there's referential integrity set up so that it is a clean operation. So a database is also always consistent about it. Another example would be, say you're doing a transaction where you move money from one account to another. The money is either in the one account or in the other, and not sort of in between somewhere or in both at some time, or that kind of stuff. So ACID is a very important concept for the database world. Of course, what then happened is that databases got bigger and bigger and bigger, and servers tried to keep up, but ultimately failed. And we ended up with what we now all know as big data or distributed data stores and so on. And what we found, or what some researchers, very clever dudes, found, is the CAP theorem, which basically CAP stands for consistency, availability, and partition tolerance. And the CAP theorem says, if you have one of those distributed data sources, you can only have 2 out of the 3. So you can't have a system that's always completely partition tolerant, so has all the data everywhere, is completely 100% available, and is consistent. You can't have that. It's great if you could, but it's just like physically and stuff not possible, just because of network delays and stuff like that, right? So what typically then was chosen is that people ended up moving to a status that's like called eventual consistency, where the overall concept is sometimes also just called BASE instead of ACID, which stands for basically available, soft state, and eventual consistency. Consider that idea sort of like, say you update your status on like some network, like Twitter or so. It doesn't really matter if your timeline is up to date to the second for someone that checks on the other end of the world, right? Like eventually they will get the same status, but if that's delayed a second or two, it doesn't matter. So that was kind of the common approach in the database world when it went and migrated, everything went to like Hadoop, Hive, big data, and all that kind of stuff. Now, of course, with the big data also getting widely used, we also ended up adopting it for systems where it does matter if it's consistent or not. So eventual consistency with terms of money is obviously not good enough, right? Like you can't have money sort of disappear and hopefully eventually appear again. That's not good enough. So now what happened is that tools such as Hive /Hadoop / the file systems like Org ended up adopting ACID approaches. Originally, it was no ACID support overall. Then they ended up doing something where on a partition level, it was ACID, provided you used some locking, and it sort of improved over time. So now we're in a situation where with Hive and HDFS, we do have ACID support, but you have to understand how that works from a system, because HDFS is a write once file system. So if you write a record, and you do an update or a change or whatever, you're writing another record. If the system like Presto doesn't have support for reading these files, it just sees 2 records and doesn't know what the difference is and which to show. And actually the way ACID is implemented is also has delta files, which then means there's even more stuff showing up. So reading org ACID tables or looking at them with the Hive connector doesn't understand what it's looking at, is just showing basically rubbish data to some degree. And that would also impact the read operation. So luckily that was changed long ago for reading. And further improvements now were necessary to also support inserting and deleting data, because now you have to take care of all these Delta files and all the other lower level details. We'll have lots of more links to those concepts and stuff online in our show notes. But this hopefully gives you a bit of a background to what Brian is going to be showing us with these ACID supports for Hive systems. And David is going to talk about what he added, this feature of inserting and deleting.
I have one comment to make on that too. As you were talking about it, it kind of reminded me, like, there's some parallels to the whole story of like how when the move happened to big data, right? So we realized like these systems weren't scaling, and we moved to big data, and we just dropped, like we said, okay, there's trade-offs, like we're dropping this requirement. So in one of those requirements, along with the ACID type of transactional requirement, was also speed. And so if you think about it, like Presto kind of fits also into that same mold of like, you know, getting back to the interactive, like, because I mean, remember databases of old were like, you know, always about like finding that perfect B tree index and trying to optimize on that and make sure that it comes back, you know, because you have somebody waiting on the other side. So the Presto is almost like that's a perfect parallel story of like something that we just said, it doesn't matter, it's big data, ETL, that's how it is, you know. And go start your query, and then go grab a coffee, and maybe even grab lunch as well. And so
yeah, that's true. It's a good analogy. It's you know, like David or myself, these like old hat developers would say, everything repeats, it just comes again, right?
Yeah, right. same shit, different decade or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool. So I just wanted to point that out, because as you were mentioning it, I was like, it kind of sounds like a similar story I've recently thought through before, and I was like, that's the whole kind of premise to Presto. Cool. So let's hop now into that's all you wanted to say in terms of ACID, Manfred? I don't want to cut you off.
I think so. I invite David to correct me because I probably messed up 5 things.
I didn't mess up anything. I'll look forward to talking after Brian shows the example.
Yeah, sure. So, well, first, before we hop into the example, I'd like to actually just kind of, go over conceptually what we're doing, and then we'll go like show the cool example afterwards. So that way, because I feel like the example is kind of without the context is not as interesting until you understand like why it's so cool. So this was your pull request, and so this is pull request 5402 for those listening on the podcast. Do you want to just tell us about like what the kind of circumstances surrounding this makes this such an interesting thing to be working on, and kind of what we're enabling here with Hive?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I had a lot of fun in August and September working on this PR that adds support for transactional insert and delete. Now, before I did any work here, Hive non-transactional tables supported insert, but we didn't have any capability to do delete from Presto. This PR adds support for transactional, both insert and delete. As Manfred said, tables are transactional in the sense that if 2 different clients try to update the same data, only one will win, and the changes made by the other one will be rolled back. And so the modification happens in a transaction, and will either the entire modification will happen or none of it will happen from the point of view of any client. As I think Manfred mentioned, or maybe Brian, the Hive transactional insert and delete uses the ORC ACID file format. That's a specific file format produced by the ORC project. And in ORC ACID, each atomic change, the result of running an insert or a delete, or someday soon an update, is assigned a transaction ID. And the names of the data files created contain that transaction ID, and the records do as well. And the management of the way that rollback is implemented in Hive ACID is that the metastore knows which transaction IDs are in effect, are to be seen by other clients. And it's only the commit operation on the transaction that causes your change to be visible to other clients. Okay. So that's the general approach to it. The changes for this PR are concentrated really in three areas. One is the support for the oric acid row format, which encodes the transaction ID, and for delete records and insert records, the row ID and the bucket for each record that's created as a result of an insert or delete transaction. Mm-hmm. A second area of work here, and maybe even the largest one, was ensuring that the Hive connector used all the capabilities that have to be used of the Hive Metastore API in order to ensure transaction consistency.
So like edge cases that maybe aren't like for the typical case, like, is that what you're talking about there?
Well, these transactions are happening on, these transactions that can conflict can happen on different nodes, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. Different, the conflict can come up in different places. And you have to be sure that you eliminate, if your transaction failed, you have to be sure that you eliminate all the changes that were created for that transaction. Okay. Some of them are file changes, others of them are metastore changes. You have to roll back both the file state and the metastore state, because Hive ACID doesn't delete anything. It just in order to implement a deletion, it adds a delete delta file that says ignore these rows when you're reading, essentially.
David, I have a question. Is any of this documented yet? Has Hive gone through and documented any of it?
There's a great document which I can send you to put in the notes about how Hive ACID works.
Okay.
So of course, it was supported by Hive itself before we supported it in our connector. Although we use the metastore capability, we obviously don't use the data reading and writing that's provided by Hive.
Yeah,
because how does that work with regards to the metastore, right? Like in the Hive connector, we support multiple Hive metastores, like the Hive metastore and then AWS Glue. Is the Hive metastore API enough defined that you could just work with that API, or did you have to sort of like write various workarounds for different metastores?
To be truthful, I haven't tested it with Glue. I believe it works, but I haven't tested it. I don't know whether there's anything that will come up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I know that Hive has this kind of long-standing issue of the only thing documenting how Hive works is the code itself, right?
And most Hive is kind of a mess that way. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you're saying around the transaction piece that they've recently come out with has a little more documentation, or you're still?
There are articles that have been written about it. There are two articles specifically that tell you, at least as a reader as opposed to an implementer, what Hive ACID stuff is about.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's typically how Hive gets documented, is open sourcing it to bloggers.
Right. So I'll send you those to include in the notes.
Great.
One important aspect of Hive ACID operations, and in particular delete, is suppose you delete 1,000 records in 200 different transactions. Since the delete files, the delete delta files, are going to be written on the well, that will result in a whole bunch of delete delta files, and you'd say, well, gee whiz, if I have to read all those delete delta files in order to actually do a query against the data, the current state of data, isn't that really slow? And the answer is it would be, except that Hive ACID does background merging of delete and insert files to create larger and larger read chunks. Because you can if you know that that the transaction is committed, then you can always combine files that are in the past with respect to with respect to that transaction.
Yeah, I noticed that when reading about Hive transaction as well. It also does compacting and all sorts of stuff
Yeah, they call it compaction, the combining process called compaction.
So is this actually a Hive binary that's responsible for this, or is this the metastore's responsibility? Who?
Some code that we link into Presto.
Okay. Okay, fair enough.
So one other thing I wanted to say about this is the plumbing needed to support the ORC ACID format and transactional operations against the right, the most modern of the Hive metastores will get recycled in a number of different places. In the next week, I'll be submitting a PR that adds support for SQL update to both the Presto engine and to the Hive connector.
Nice.
Oh wow.
And it uses all these same mechanisms, and then after that, and we don't know how long it'll take to deliver, I'll be working on SQL merge in the Presto engine and the Hive implementation of
So when you're saying this merge and update functionality goes into the Presto engine, does that potentially then mean that any connector that wants to implement support for that has an SPI endpoint to implement, and then so individual contributors for the different connectors can go ahead and add update and merge functionality to their connectors?
That's exactly right. And the two biggest tasks for me, I'm writing tests like crazy, as you might imagine. But I'm also going to write a document in the developer guide section of Presto documentation that documents in a lot of detail how delete is supposed to work with respect to the connector, which was not documented anywhere like that, at least, and how update works. Update's, of course, much more complicated, but
yeah.
But,
awesome. So ultimately, once this is in, we can from the community put out a call for people to start implementing, reading a document and then start implementing delete and update and stuff functionality in the connectors, right?
Exactly. That's my intent.
That's cool.
I would love to do it. You mentioned I worked on Iceberg earlier. I'd love to do it for Iceberg. Iceberg is a great format, and it supports ORC. So the path is very straightforward to support these operations in Iceberg, although I don't know that there's a great deal of demand right now.
Yeah, but it definitely is there.
Awesome.
One thing I wanted to kind of point out, so there seems to be a lot of confusion when it comes to merging these topics of transactions and this big data stuff. And so literally this morning, I saw this post that shows Presto. It talks about data engineering, open source stacks, and they talk about just kind of different areas for different things like Spark and Airflow, blah, 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 blah. And then show under data warehousing, they list Presto, which it's fine. It's kind of a data warehousing tool in some regards. But then somebody who made this, it wasn't the original poster. I think he pulled this from somebody else's blog, but they called it OLTP. And so two questions on it. One thing is obviously I corrected this because Presto, for the record, anybody who's listening on this at any point, Presto is not OLTP. It does not do full-on transactioning. But with this, we have this kind of, transactional, heading in a transactional direction. Is it ever going to be a point where we can say that the Hive connector is OLTP level, like ready, or it's an OLTP system in its own right since we are supporting all of this, or is that just never going to be the case in your opinion, David?
I don't know. I suspect that. I don't know that it wouldn't work for the classic, TPCH right now. Maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. I haven't tried it. Yeah, sorry to be so unhelpful.
No, that's fine because it's a pretty big question to ask, especially live. But and it has a lot of implications. But I'm just curious. So one thing is currently, as of today, Presto's main goal is not to do OLTP. It's to do online analytics processing. And so with that, you're not trying to, it drops a lot of these like original requirements that we used to have, but it's not to say that we're not still going to try to solve them. And so I want it to be clear, like it's not OLTP, and even if it's connecting to MySQL, which is an OLTP database, you know, it supports OLTP, and it's not in its own right an OLTP system. So I saw that this morning. I was like, wow, this came up like right as we were about ready to hop into kind of like ACID transactions. So I felt like it was kind of fitting within the theme that we were talking today.
You're absolutely right. The design center of Presto is super fast streaming to support queries.
To read, yeah.
And so there's modification stuff. It's important, but it's not the design center.
Yep. So cool. Wanted to bring that up because I almost forgot to mention that. So not everything you read online is true.
Surprise!
Surprise. Great. So I didn't mean to. Did you have anything else, David, you wanted to kind of go over before we hop into the example?
The only thing that I really wanted to say is that up here in the PR, it lists the test matrix. It's a really large test matrix because there, particularly for insert, there are lots of kinds of inserts with original files and not original files and so on. So a whole bunch of the effort went into trying to adequately cover the test matrix. And of course, this is something you never do it as well as you want to, but that's where a lot of the effort went. So that's the last thing I wanted to say.
Great. And I brought this tab up because I wanted to ask you the question I asked you offline. But does this have any like correlation with the SQL, like running a transaction or commit or anything like that? Or can we do these kind of?
There is a correlation, but at this point, at least for the Hive ACID system, the scope of a transaction is a single operation, a single update, a single insert, a single delete.
So as far as I know, Hive itself doesn't support that yet either. Like the concept of start a consecutive, like begin, roll back, and all kind of stuff. Yeah. Hive itself doesn't support that.
So this is yet again one of the big differences between true OLTP and like what we're able to start supporting now in Presto and what Hive is supporting now.
Well, object storage ultimately is just a bit different. Like distributed object storage is just not the same as just a random RDBMS database.
Right. So, okay. With that, let's go to a quick example. So I already have my MinIO set up. This is going to be fairly straightforward. I actually have, this is dbeaver. We're going to, for those on the podcast, I'm going to be basically running an example. First, we're going to create a schema over a MinIO bucket called ACID. So that ACID MinIO bucket already exists and it's running on my local machine. So we'll create the schema. Let's go ahead and do that. Create schema worked. So if we show schemas in MinIO now, we should be able to see, boom, ACID showed up. So and this is just the arbitrary name. You call it whatever you're going to call it within your own company. And then we're just going to create a table. The big deal about this table is it's under our original schema we just created. So MinIO is the catalog, ACID is the schema, and then we're going to make a table called test. So it's create table minio.acid.test. We're going to have two simple fields that are integers, A and B. And then we're going to make sure the format is orc. By default, it's going to, Presto uses orc, but, just for clarity, we're going to use format orc here. And then the big key here is that we're making this table with the property statement transactional equals true. We are creating this as a transactional ACID table. So let's go ahead and run that. And now let's show the tables. And sure enough, we have test created. So if we look back here, we should now see there's a test folder that shows up underneath the ACID bucket in MinIO. So, but there's no data or anything written there yet because we haven't written any data yet.
So that transactional is true. Where does that end up? Like, is that basically something that's stored as a metadata in the Hive metastore?
Metastore, yep.
Okay.
I believe. I mean, unless I'm wrong, right there, David. I just totally assumed.
It's a table property, and it ends up in the meta store. Yes.
Okay.
Cool.
Yeah, I feel like it was going to be in the same spot that we would put like the orc format and in any other kind of default table format that will go in there. Will be in the same location. Okay, and then we'll run insert into. Well, basically, you're going to insert 2 rows. One is 1010, the other one's 2020. Actually, this would have been October 10th of this year. Now that I'm looking at it. All right, so we inserted those. Let's look at those first and make sure those return correctly. So if we select all from minio.acid.test, we get 1 row of 1010, the second row of 2020. So now let's look inside here, and sure enough, we see some new folder. For those of you that are used to kind of what what a traditional table would look like underneath here, it's usually just like a orc file, but instead we have like a new folder called Delta, and it has some underscores and then 00001, 00001, 000. David, what's going on here with this file?
The 000s are the transaction ID, and it specifies it twice because it wants to allow for a range when it does compaction, a range of transaction IDs that can be stored in the data file.
Okay.
And the data file is an orc formatted file. It has the there's this orc acid version which has nothing in it. It's or 1 byte in it, and it's just saying this is for sure an orc acid bucket. And then there's a bucket if you look inside the bucket.
Mm-hmm. This one's just the actual orc file. The orc file itself is bucketed.
And that's the orc file that contains the data and the metadata for the insert.
Yeah, I think you were thinking if we would have made a partitioned table, this would have been a folder. Yeah, all the hairiness. There's partitions, then there's buckets, then there's transactions. It's like the level of complexity here for Hive. So for our listeners that don't see this, so underneath the test folder, which is where the level for the table is, there's a Delta file, which is a file folder underneath that. That's representing the transaction, and then underneath that there's an orc file. If you were to have a partition, there'd be yet another layer of folders to represent the Hive partition. So it's like we were just talking about how it gets kind of sticky. So is this 0000 bucket underscore 000 file? That's the orc file with our data, but what does that 000 mean?
The 0000 is a statement ID. The orc format allows you to have multiple bucket files in the same Delta directory with different statement IDs, and it treats them, when you query, it reads them all, basically.
And if you bucket it by a particular field?
We don't actually use that feature. We read it correctly, but we don't create at least Delta files with statement IDs. We will create updates that use statement IDs.
Okay. And if it is, if we do at some point, and this would be on a Hive table, maybe not Presto yet, but on a Hive table, if you were bucketing by a particular field, then it would just basically spit that out into different orc files. Is that the idea?
Yes. Yeah. Basically.
Okay. Got it.
And we haven't said it explicitly, but we should say it explicitly.
Okay.
If you create a transactional file, a transactional table in Hive, and insert and delete in Hive, Presto can read it. If Presto creates a transactional table and you insert and delete with Presto, then Hive can read it. There's complete data compatibility between them, and we've ensured that partly by writing the product test that way, but also we have a product test that runs Spark SQL against the insert and delete data and verifies that everybody agrees that the format is correct.
So to your point, I actually have a connection up to the same Hive instance that is pulling that. Let's just verify that. So we got ACID here, and then let's see if we can pull that out. Maybe I put something. This is because we don't have catalog. We are talking to Hive, so it should be the database ACID and test. That was my fault that we got an error the first time. And now we should be seeing... Well, this is just Hive being Hive, isn't it? 1010 and 2020. Okay, so yeah, it took a minute for it to come back, but Hive, as you said, Hive was able to read when the data that was coming back from the same table that we just created. So now let's test the delete. We're gonna go say delete from minio.acid.test where a equals 10. So that's only gonna leave one of our files there. So let's read that back out. We just deleted that one, so we should see 2020 only. Let's also verify that from Hive for fun. Live testing on the show. Sorry, I don't mean to make you sweat, David.
I'm sure it wasn't sweating.
No, he was like, I got this. Whoa, so now we have a new folder called delete_delta, and then there's this 00002, 00002. So
a 2 is the new transaction, right? We did a new transaction to run the delete, and its transaction ID was 2.
Okay. Now, is this also showing data here? Is this the updated data that's only has the 2020?
It is the data that says when reading this, you should ignore 1010.
Okay, got it.
It's a delta, right? It's telling you what to ignore when querying, basically.
Very cool. Okay. Well, I think that is we've successfully tested your your PR. I think we can say it's good. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining, David. Did you have anything else you wanted to talk about before we headed on to the question of the week?
No, this is all great fun.
Yeah, for sure. All right.
Excellent work. Looks great.
Yeah, very good work. So if you wanted to hop off, feel free if you want to stick around. And Manfred, I haven't checked lately, but do we have any questions?
Nope. Oh, hang on. Actually, there's something. Israel is just asking if we're going to walk through the code of the PR, and I'd have to say no, we're not.
Yeah.
Because that's like very deep in the bowels. It's a bit too complicated.
But of course, it's brilliantly structured, so anybody can read it, right?
Yeah,
of course.
So the goal,
just like your future PRs will be brilliantly structured.
Yeah. So the goal of this, Israel, is that we're trying to bring the awareness about what it's doing and kind of understand, like, from a functional perspective, how what's actually being accomplished. We'll leave it to you, and at some point, if like the demand is high enough for us to do kind of a code safari, I think that's definitely something that we can look into doing at some point. But we were trying to keep this community broadcast to a broader audience, maybe some that are new to Presto and some that are as well trying to kind of learn just enough from the kind of upper levels of what's going on in the community. And so we don't necessarily want to always just dive deep into the code. I definitely think if, there may be a time where we can do some of these code safaris, as I would call them. And
maybe a good opportunity would be when David has written the SPI endpoint documentation and changes, and then we do a code walkthrough of what would be done,
if you're
so
willing
that others
to do that.
potentially can implement that. There's also a good question that came up from RDSR13, and that he's asking if Presto wrote it, would Spark be able to read it?
Yes, of course. We tested.
That's what I thought, because it just uses the native Hive stuff as well, right?
Yeah. Cool. And let's just put a...
Very nice.
There are various constraints about versions, right? You have to have a 3.0.1.2 or later version.
As usual, right? Like you have to have Presto 3.45. Old stuff is old stuff. Who knows, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So cool. So with the questions, I don't think there are any more as far as I know. Manfred, do you want to just do one quick look over on the Presto?
Yeah. In the
Slack?
meantime, you should go and talk about Java, because
I'm going to do that because
flying,
we're
man.
running out of time. Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. So let me, actually, I have nothing to show. I'm going to go straight back to the interview scene, and let me pull up the question of the week. So the question of the week that we've got from a couple people that were kind of asking like, what's the point of the shift to Java 11? I feel like that answer is pretty obvious now, but I don't want to skip it totally. And there's a couple nuances to how some of the questions were asked. So the basic question is, why is Java 11 needed in newer versions of Presto? And how do I get the older version, an older version of Presto that allows me to use Java 8? And if Java 11 isn't available to use like in my environment. So the first answer to that question is to like why we're doing the move to Java 11 is that there is basically the support for Java 8 is now, and by this point, I think when the original questions were asked, this wasn't the case, but now the answer is that there's no more continuing support unless I think you what is it, if you're with Oracle or something, like if you
have some paying contract with some JVM provider, like Oracle obviously has support, Red Hat has support for theirs. I think if you want a smaller vendor, you can talk to Azul with their Zulu version, but the publicly available releases do not include security backports and whatever else for 8 anymore.
Correct. So
the supported LTS is currently 11.
Yep.
The next LTS will be 17.
Yeah. So that is why we are on Java 11. There are also a couple, performance boosts that we get just by the default of, the progression of Java in general. There are bugs that are constantly getting fixed. There are optimizations in the garbage collector. Compressor. I'm thinking of the Hive stuff, the garbage collection. And so that's another reason why it's just like performance improvements. It was just time. And so I think all in all, like if you can just really push to try to get to Java 11. And a point that you made, Manfred, at one point was like, you don't have to have the client be on Java 11. The client can still run on Java 8. It's just the only requirement is that your server, wherever you're hosting your server, that runs on 11. So that's a really important point. I think sometimes people think that like if I'm on version of Java, it has to be the same for client and server, and that's just not the case. So
that applies to the CLI, the Presto CLI, as well as the JDBC driver. So if you have some sort of Java application that is still also using Java 8 to use the JDBC driver to connect, then you're still fine with that as well. So you should be pretty good. The other aspect I think that you need to consider is Presto should run on its own server anyway. So the whole idea of having to share JVM with some other software running, that's not a proper deployment of Presto anyway. So it shouldn't really matter too much. And then specifically also for teams that run Presto on Kubernetes clusters or in some other Docker fashion, 11 just runs way better on Docker than 8.
Correct. Yeah, and so yeah, to your point, if you're standing up Presto at all, just use 11. It's like you shouldn't be sharing. The reason why we're saying you shouldn't be sharing is that maybe something that depends on Java 8, some other service. If you're trying to put those on the same servers, then that's already kind of setting yourself up for failure in terms of like Presto memory needs and all of these other resource needs that are going to be on those servers. So good question. Definitely something. Oh, and the last part of the question was, if for some reason you really need to stick on Java 8 for whatever reason, maybe your ops team doesn't support Java 11 or moving up for now, then 328 was the last server that supports Java 8. So you would have to go back to that prior version, and you can download that from the Maven repo. You can also go on to the Presto SQL documentation and download it there. There's definitely ways for you to deploy that. Don't want to hold you up, but you're not going to get as like the most updated features. You're already going to be running slow because you're on an older version of Java, so it's just not going to be showcasing Presto the way it should be and where it is today on the latest breaking stuff. Especially if you're trying to convince your boss that they should, we should bring in Presto and replace certain Spark ETL tasks or something like that. So, okay.
One last note I want to add for a call out to the community. For those of you that like experimenting, we very much encourage you to try Presto with newer JVM versions. Like the JVM is now at release number 15, and we would love to know that it works on newer versions. We honestly don't run excessive testing on anything else than the Azul Zulu 11 version. But if you have any insights or feel like you want to play around with like trying Presto on Java 15 or whatever the latest now is, please do so and let us know if you find anything, because we want to obviously make sure that we are future compatible. And at some stage, we will obviously upgrade to 17, although that might be a while away. But, you know, enabling running on newer versions, maybe there's some benefits to be had. So
For sure.
let us know.
Cool. All right. Well, if you have any questions to submit, you can either go to the prestosql.io/Slack. That's going to be also in the show notes. And then you can hit us up on the Presto-community-broadcast channel to submit either like a PR of the week or a question of the week. We'd like to hear back from you on that. Otherwise, you can direct message myself or Manfred. And then music for the show is from the Mega Man 6 gameplay album by Krzysztof Slowakowski. And if you want to find myself or Manfred, you can find us at Manfred at Simple Agility. And then my handle is at Bits on DataDev. David, did you have a Twitter that anybody can reach you at?
Everyone can chase us down on Slack as well, and David is there too.
Yeah. I couldn't hear you there, David. I think you might be on mute.
Slack's a better choice for me. I don't have a Twitter account.
You don't have the Twitters. Okay, sounds good. I mean, good on you.
Exactly.
You're living a healthier life because of it. All right. Well, thank you all. And until next time, for Fast Data at Resto, Presto is the besto. See y'all.